As Ribbentrop descended the steps from the plane, a military band struck up first Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, and then the Internationale. Introductions followed, with smart handshakes and smiles all round for the Soviet welcoming delegation and their German guests. Watching Ribbentrop inspect a guard of honor from the elite Soviet Air Force squadrons, Hitler's pilot Hans Bauer was struck by the surreal sight of watching the German foreign minister marching briskly along the line with his arm outstretched in the Hitler salute. "My God," he said, "wonders will never cease." It's the 23rd of August, 1939, and this is the History Book Buffs on the days that changed the world.
So, Roger, that incredible prose that we started this episode with was written by obviously a master historian, a prose stylist.
Absolute master.
It was from The Devil's Alliance by Roger Moorhouse.
Yes.
Now we're doing a new thing for our followers, which is we're doing Days That Changed the World.
Yes.
And we're going to look at some incredible days.
And huge vistas of possibility have opened up.
I know, and loads of books. So
Yeah.
it means we don't just have to do the books that are coming out now,
Yeah.
some of which are great, some of which are less than great. We can look at days that literally made history turn on its head, turn the world upside
Brilliant.
down.
I mean, it's a genius idea.
I know, it's almost like we're brilliant at this. Okay,
3D.
so we're starting
We're starting with a subject close to my heart, of course.
And the day is?
Which is the 23rd of August, 1939.
Mm-hmm.
The date of the signature of the Nazi-Soviet Pact, the Molotov-Ribbentop Pact, which is frustratingly in the Western kind of canon, in the Western narrative, despite my best efforts and those of others that have, I think, honestly, largely followed in my wake, and there's still a fairly small number. It's still kind of underestimated the significance of the Nazi-Soviet Pact. If you travel to Eastern Europe, in the Baltic states, Poland, for example, it's absolutely front center in their national experience and their national narrative. In this country, it's still seen really as, the last sort of diplomatic chess move before the outbreak of war, right? So in most history textbooks, it sort of warrants, a sentence or no more.
But it's completely crucial, right? Because without the pact in place, Hitler would not have felt empowered and enabled to invade Poland. It's as simple as that. So the war would not have started had he not secured
so it's
that
much.
flag.
It is much greater than that. It's not just the last diplomatic chess move. In a sense, from Hitler's perspective, that's what it was. It was making sure that Stalin was out of the game. So he had to sort of buy Stalin off, which is what he does. But in the process, of course, he is obliged to effectively hand over half of Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. And that means that at a very rough estimate, or even conservative estimate, you could say that the lives of 40 or 50 million people are directly affected by the Nazi-Soviet Pact, because they are consequently then consigned to the Soviet sphere of influence, which means Soviet occupation, which means deportation, which means forced enlistment in the Red Army for the men. So it turns life upside down for 40 or 50 million people.
And it enables Hitler to invade Poland.
Yeah, and it
triggers those guarantees,
and it signals the start of World War II.
And I think also reading back into the literature, the consequences of it were understood to be seismic at the time, but because they were overtaken by events, I think that's partly why the kind of revolutionary nature of the pact has sort of been lost, been forgotten.
I think that's true. If you look at, the degree to which this was a shock for all concerned is very, very obvious if you look at contemporary accounts. British intelligence, for example, I think about a week before the pact was signed, on the 23rd of August, was merrily writing that there are rumours that the Soviets and the Germans are in talks, but the idea of the two of them finding common ground is unthinkable.
It's unthinkable,
and that's how most people thought. And actually, with the signature of the pact, there are I mean, boo-hoo, but there are Nazi party members who's, you know, they throw their Nazi party badges into the garden of the Brown House, which is the party headquarters in Munich, in protest.
Look, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's tell the story of the day and start. I mean, this idea of it being unthinkable. Okay, so the background to this is that it is unthinkable because the Nazis and the communists, to a large extent, have defined themselves by their hatred of each other for the entire 1930s.
Yes.
So it is not an obvious thing. And then in the immediate weeks leading up to it, the Allies are courting Stalin. They're trying to, I mean, they're a little bit lackadaisical and arguably could have gone a bit harder, but they're trying to kind of, you know, sound him out and see whether he could come in on their side. Everybody wants to just deal with the devil. So take us to the morning, or I guess the day before. When do the Germans are flying into Moscow? It happens in Moscow.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, Hitler has been, or Hitler's regime has been saber-rattling against the Poles really since the previous bout of saber-rattling, which had been so fruitful for them, which was against Czechoslovakia. And that had provoked, you know, the previous autumn had provoked the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia at the Munich conference. And pretty much straight on the back of that, so, you know, let's say from the new year of 39 onwards, there's firstly a wooing of Poland, and then later on, after Poland proves itself to be rather intransigent and rather resistant to Berlin's best efforts at wooing, the sort of scene shifts to a much more aggressive policy. So from the early summer onwards, there's this policy of you know, carrying out what are basically sort of terrorist attacks against Poland, arson attacks on isolated farmhouses by the border, sort of thing, and there are terrorist attacks. There's a bomb planted on a suburban train in Poland that summer. So, you know, this sort of a ramping up of the rhetoric as well, accompanying all of this, all of it constantly pointing to the Poles as being untrustworthy, as being sort of bandits, and essentially, I suppose, trying to make sure that Poland is isolated in the conflict that, from the German perspective, is to come. Right. So while that's going on, of course, there's also a jockeying for position amongst the Allies. So the British and the French send a delegation by ship up to St. Petersburg, up through the Baltic, arguably rather slowly. And I think part of the British thinking, if you just isolate it from the British, but I think the British thinking is largely they don't particularly want to make a treaty with Stalin. Stalin's demands for any sort of treaty signature would always be territory or some sort of favourable offering, probably Polish territory. The Poles weren't going to give it, and they knew that. So in a sense, what the British, I think, and probably the French as well, are thinking is that they can essentially talk out the campaigning season. They're still thinking in terms of almost like the Napoleonic Wars. They're thinking in terms of a campaigning season. So I think they're trying to make the whole thing go slowly so that the rains come and then the snows, and by which time, you know, they sort of kick it into the long grass for the next year.
Meanwhile, I don't know if you know this bit, because this is my bit of historical research at the moment. So Guy Burgess is supplying the Russians with intelligence, telling Stalin that the English and French don't really want to. They're just messing. They're not into it really. So Stalin kind of knows that French and English kind of overtures are more about just muddying the water than actually serious attempts of marriage.
Yeah, I mean, also it didn't take Guy Burgess to inform Stalin that essentially what the British and the French wanted was a perpetuation of the status quo. Yeah, and it was a status quo that Stalin wasn't interested in. Right, Stalin. We forget the Soviet Union is just as much of a revisionist power as the Third Reich was, and as Italy was. Right, they might be on the other side of the political spectrum, but their interest in upending the post-World War I settlement is just as vital and just as central as it is for the other two regimes.
And Stalin, you know, we can talk endlessly about whether his motivation is sort of purely rapacious or ideological, but he intends the Soviet Union to expand outwards, even at this early stage. This is not This is part of the ideology. The minute the Bolsheviks got power, they were trying to get to Germany through Poland
exactly.
in order to, midwife the revolution, which was what their raison d'etre was. So so Stalin, even in 39, has always one eye on that ideological vision, which leads to the Soviet Union being at the center of a Marxist Europe.
Yes, I mean there's two aspects going on here. The first one is that like every essentially Russian nationalist, and before everyone writes in and says he wasn't Russian, he was Georgian, we know that, but he thinks like a Russian nationalist. So like every Russian nationalist, he is hell-bent on restoring the lost territory that had been ceded and lost in various ways at the end of the First World War. So the Baltic states, Finland, what becomes Eastern Poland, and so on. The list goes on. So he wants all that territory back, right? That's point one. Point two is, as you say, the idea of expanding the Soviet Union by force had been essentially nipped in the bud with the Battle of Warsaw in 1920, but using ongoing conflict as you said, to midwife the bringing about of a communist Europe is absolutely still on the agenda. In the same way as World War One, to a communist mind in Moscow, World War One had ultimately, through its defeat, had brought the Soviets to power, the Bolsheviks to power. So a second war in Europe was bound to bring the communists to power in the rest of Europe. That was the logic that's being employed.
Yeah. So that's the background. French and English kind of playing politics, but not particularly serious. Stalin has his own agenda. Hitler has his own agenda. The French and the English are in Moscow, and then the Germans fly in, but the French and English don't know the Germans are flying in, right? So you've got some
British senior.
Sorry.
You're excluding our Scottish friends.
Yeah, I know. I did. Yeah, horrible of me. Anyways, you've got some lovely stuff in your book about the Germans' arrival. They're on the plane, and and what are they thinking as they're flying into Moscow?
There's some lovely accounts of them flying in, because it's a huge entourage that fly in. So obviously there's Hitler's pilot. There's I think 2 or 3 aircraft that fly in. And there's sort of SS officers and various people. Hitler sends his photographer Heinrich Hoffmann, for example. Hoffmann's task is to have a very good look at Stalin. So Hitler's obsessed with Stalin's racial character, shall we say. So he wants to know. He charges Hoffmann with telling him whether Stalin's earlobes are attached to his ears, or if they're sort of flush.
And
he wants to know. Whichever way round it was, I forget which way the madness went, but either way was a signifier of either racial goodness or racial badness.
And let's not forget the revelation that you gave me in an earlier episode of the History Book Buffs, when you revealed to me that by the end of the war, Stalin ends up owning Hitler's teeth.
Yes, exactly. So ears at the beginning, teeth at the end. Exactly. Yeah. So Hoffmann is there. Hoffmann is a great raconteur. I mean, he's a fascinating character in many ways, Heinrich Hoffmann. He's probably the only one from Hitler's entourage that you'd actually want to have a sit down and drink with.
Am I going to have to edit that out?
Yeah, I think genuinely he is. I mean, he's a great drinker. He's known as the what do we say, the Reich drunkard. That was his. That was because he was permanently drunk. But he's a brilliant photographer.
That's one of the. So they're all pissed throughout this whole thing, because it's part of wheeling the oils of diplomacy.
Yes, there's a lot of drinking.
Drunken men in a room carving up Europe.
Yes,
but I'm getting ahead of myself. So they're flying in.
So they fly in, and the thoughts they're having now. They're talking about. There's a couple of in the entourage who are saying, it's unthinkable that we, having made our own revolution, our own Nazi revolution, the end point of that should be us flying into Moscow, which had been the sort of fountainhead of evil as far as they were concerned. So that they were flying in there, they just found absolutely astonishing.
Okay.
So that sort of sets the scene, and then
as they're going in, what does Hitler want? He just wants to secure that flank so that he can attack.
Initially,
Poland.
yes. So he just wants Stalin out of the game, effectively, and he's willing to he's willing to give a pretty high price, pay a pretty high price to achieve that. But that, of course, comes in during the negotiations. So initially, it's just about getting Stalin out of the game.
And to the guys on the ground, they have Hitler's authority to negotiate.
Yes, up to a point. Up to a point. So Ribbentrop is in charge of the whole delegation, who's the German foreign minister. Fantastically vain character. I mean, rather stupid. Fabulously vain. Had been a champagne salesman. I mean, he's in the aftermath of this, he's going to be held up as like the new Bismarck, like he's some sort of statesman. He's actually a bit of a buffoon.
Yeah.
But he's going in. An excess of self-confidence sometimes is no bad thing, is it? I mean, it's not something we suffer with, pair of us, but some people do, and that's good for them.
It takes you a long way.
It can take you a long way until you crash and burn.
Yeah.
It takes you a long way, and Ribbentrop falls into that category. So he's in charge of it all. So they land at Kodinka airfield in Moscow. Interestingly, the Soviets have to source swastika banners from the set of a propaganda film, obviously anti-German propaganda, that was being made at the time, because they didn't have any swastika banners. So they had to hang up some swastika banners from this propaganda film, and the entourage sort of deplane, and they're sort of playing Deutschland über alles the NKVD band is playing Deutschland über alles. So it's all thoroughly kind of counterintuitive at the very least.
Yeah.
And they're fated. They're all welcomed, and they're all shaking hands and smiles and introductions and all of that. And some members of the entourage are then sort of taken or allowed to. So Hoffman, for example, does a little tour of Moscow.
Yeah.
Obviously being tailed heavily by the NKVD.
Yeah.
Ribbentrop goes straight to business, so gets straight into some low-level negotiations with his counterparts, with Molotov and others, in the afternoon. Later, he's introduced to Stalin as well, which comes in later on. But it's all very exciting for them.
And how much negotiations does it take? How long are they there before the actual signing?
The signing is after midnight, actually. So technically we should call it the 24th, but it's,
No, but what day do they fly in?
They're flying on the 23rd.
So they wrap it all up in a day?
All in an afternoon and an evening.
In one afternoon, they sit there drinking
and divide up Europe. So what Ribbentrop initially negotiates with them is a non-aggression pact. Right, this is what the Nazi-Soviet Pact is. Non-aggression pacts are the very much the sort of spirit of the age. It's very much a thing of the interwar period. So everyone's doing this, and the Soviets and the Germans do one. Initially, Ribbentrop, in a fit of excitement, or a surfeit of self-confidence, perhaps, suggests that the non-aggression pact should be for 100 years. And Stalin brings him back to earth by saying that if they do that, then people will suspect that they're not being serious. She says, how about 10 years? And he goes, yeah, all right, then let's do 10 years.
We should just remind ourselves, I mean, Stalin is a very canny operator. He
extremely.
is a brilliant negotiator.
Extremely. I mean, when you read the accounts of this, and there are accounts from various participants, like the interpreters, for example, who survived, and a couple of minor German diplomats who were present, and so on. Schulenburg being one of them, and the German interpreter as well was there, Gustav Hilger. They all leave eyewitness accounts, and Stalin is like he's like the spider in the web. He just comes across as being absolutely pulling strings and knowing exactly how far he can push Ribbentrop. He comes across as a real operator.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
So they are in this room. They negotiate the non-aggression pact, and then there's also, isn't there, the secret protocol? Yes.
So this is the non-aggression pact bit is quite easy, right? So there were non-aggression pacts across Europe.
It does what it says on the tin.
It does.
We're
what
not
it
going to
says
be
on the tin.
aggressive.
10 years that you'll solve any problems by arbitration and so on, by discussion and then arbitration. And then basically sort of Stalin comes to the real meat of the agreement, which is this secret protocol. So he suggests the secret protocol. It comes from the Soviet side. And this is basically his price for
The
keeping
non-aggression pact.
himself out of the invasion of Poland, right?
Yeah.
Which is what he knows, that's what Hitler wants to do. And this is his price for doing that. And he basically says that he wants Central Europe. He wants the Baltic states back. He wants, Finland to be in his sphere of influence. Eastern Poland, Bessarabia, and Northern Bukovina from Romania, which is essentially, the line of territories that Russia had
prior to
the First World War. So these are Russian irredenta. We want that back, right? That's price number one. We should add that actually there had been an economic agreement already signed like a day before, which was also crucial to them, was they had an economic relationship with the Germans. So, that is all part of the price that he's demanding from Hitler. Ribbentrop does the kind of the poker player thing and sort of says, well, I just have to confer with the boss. And makes a phone call and speaks to Hitler, who's off at the Berghof in Berchtesgaden, and basically says this is what he's asking for. And Hitler paces up and down. There's a wonderful scene that's described by Nikolaus von Below, who was the Air Force adjutant in Hitler's entourage. And he talks about, at the time, there was this storm brewing over the Obersalzberg. That wonderful, if you've ever seen that valley where the Berghof was, and you've got Hitler's famous terrace and all that, and it looks out across the valley and across a mountain on the other side, which is called the Untersberg. And there was a thunderstorm over the Untersberg. So they were watching a thunderstorm as this phone call came in.
Amazing.
It's a wonderful scene. And basically Hitler agrees to essentially everything that Stalin demands. It's not his to give away. Of course, this is the fate of those 50 million people that we're talking about.
Hitler says yes. Stalin, standing underneath the portrait of Lenin, all the pictures are of him underneath the portrait of Lenin. He's all smiles, vodka all round.
Yes. So they break out the champagne first of all, and the vodka, to toast the agreement. So they pull out all the paperwork. Most of the body of the pact and so on has already been drawn up, so that's quite easy. They'd quickly do the secret protocol. Everything is signed. They bring out the alcohol to, in the standard Russian way, that this is to christen the new treaty. And then, of course, they usher the press in, and crucially, Hoffman is there, Hitler's photographer is there, who pulls out his camera, which is no small thing, obviously, in 1939. A sort of a professional photographer's camera is a big thing in 1939, effectively. So he pulls out his camera, and Stalin waves him over and says, "We have to move the drinks because otherwise people will think we're drunk." So you can see throughout that Stalin's kind of acutely aware of the bizarreness, the fundamental bizarreness of what's going on. So he doesn't want them to be taken for not being serious by saying, be 100 years. And then he doesn't want people to think that they were drunk when they signed it. So he has all the glasses, moved away. And the press come in and take the photographs of those famous photographs that we see. And Hoffman does take a few of them, a few pictures of of them, even later on, of them sort of even clinking glasses, which Stalin was not very happy about. But the photographic record of that evening is amazing, and a lot of it is Hoffman's pictures. And of course, he's doing it because he has to take those pictures back to Hitler, and he's got to show Hitler what Stalin was like and report back about this new ally that Adolf Hitler has gained for himself.
It's absolutely extraordinary, and it was seismic. So we'll talk about the impact first on the West, and then on what then happens to those lands that have been carved up. So first of all, the news gets out, and people are absolutely gobsmacked, aren't they?
Yeah. So the pact itself, as I said, is a kind of a non-aggression pact is a rather run-of-the-mill thing in the 1930s, but a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union is big noise. I mean, this is like some sort of like an alliance between, America and the Ayatollahs in Iran now. It's that sort of size.
And the communists are tearing up some communists are tearing up their badges.
Yeah.
Some, Nazi party members are furiously
protesting.
denouncing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are I mean, a couple of examples in Paris of Communist Party members committing suicide over the signature of the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which is crazy. It shows you the significance of it for them, right? Because this is seen as a betrayal. They see it as a betrayal of everything they stood for.
So obviously, I've written a book about the Cambridge Five coming out next April. Anthony Blunt and Guy Burgess, absolutely committed communists, driving on a motoring holiday in France.
It's very bourgeois, isn't it?
I know.
For a pair of communists.
Communists on a motoring holiday in France. And they hear about the Nazi-Soviet Pact and they are completely bowled over. I mean, the way Blunt describes it in his memoir is like he'd never seen Burgess so kind of tortured and uncertain about what his response should be to any sort of act. I mean, Burgess was so certain in his ideological beliefs, and this absolutely rattled him. And they race back to the UK, and there they have a kind of meetings with their other communist friends some of whom are just absolutely shattered by it. And there's one guy Goronwy Rees, who'd Blunt had recruited to also be a communist spy, who basically, at that point, that was the end for him. He's like, I'm not doing that anymore.
Wow.
At least so he says. And it sent absolute shockwaves to British communists. Now, what's quite interesting, and we'll briefly talk about this before we get back to what happens in Eastern Europe, is that the Cambridge Five later say, oh, it's all fine. We knew that it was just a cunning ploy by Stalin to buy time, to build up his troops before, before the showdown with Hitler.
Yeah.
But this is the story that comes later. This is the story that postdates Barbarossa, and this is a story that postdates Stalingrad. This is, after the war. And actually during the war, it's the whitewashing of Stalin. It's the whitewashing of Stalin. It's like, it was all a cunning plan, and that's how
it's actually. And actually comes out the first speech that Stalin makes after Barbarossa. He kind of gives the narrative line to the communist world, where he says, okay, we're up against it, and we're facing great hardship and so on. But he has to explain away the Nazi-Soviet Pact at that point.
Yeah.
And he does so by using this point of argument. He says, essentially, to paraphrase, we knew they were going to attack us at some point, so all I was doing was building a buffer, holding them arm's length, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that line comes from July 1941.
And everybody...
And everyone's run with it essentially ever since. And it's completely not true.
And also, it's demonstrably not true, because on the eve of Barbarossa, when all the intelligence reports were coming in that the Germans were going to attack, Stalin was throwing them out, saying, don't be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the reason he was throwing them out is, from his point of view, the secret protocol had worked brilliantly.
Yeah.
Him and Hitler, in the intervening period, had carved up that entire
and had done great things as far as they were both concerned. Yeah, and it's very interesting when Schulenburg, who was the German ambassador, arrives to deliver the information that they were invading in June 1941. Ribbentrop's response to that announcement face to face is to say, what have we done to deserve this? Straight away. So it's clear that they think this is right. Maybe it's a tactical arrangement, but this is absolutely not what Stalin later describes it as. It's not that tactical, buying time operation. It just isn't.
And 100%. And then in the meantime, he's invaded eastern Poland. He's taken over the Baltic states,
invaded Finland.
Invaded Finland, the only place where it doesn't quite go right for him. And, the suffering is immense. He sets out. So, I mean, let's not forget, the suffering is also immense where the Germans are invading everywhere.
Absolutely.
So it's a kind of double-edged sword. But that story is very well known. I think what is slightly less known is, in 1943 through the first half of 1941, Stalin sets out to completely decapitate Polish society.
Yep.
More than 1 million Poles are deported to terrible camps in Siberia, mainly women and children.
Yep.
The same thing happens in the Baltics. Tens of thousands of women and children and, whatever men they can round up, sent to die in labor camps in, the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
It's an absolute tragedy for the people of Eastern Europe.
It is. And this is all within the under the auspice or the aegis of the Nazi-Soviet Pact. And that's what's always forgotten in that kind of rather lazy interpretation, Western European, British interpretation, which just sees the pact as a sort of part of a diplomatic chess
ongoing,
game. They forget all of this happens because of the pact. The invasion of Finland, the invasion of Poland, and all of those deportations, and all of those citizens. If tens of millions of people become Soviet citizens effectively overnight, with everything that entails in terms of persecution by the secret police, possible deportation, being forcibly enlisted into the Red Army if you're a young man, for example. It turns the world upside down for those people.
I read a report from the British consul in Riga who wrote back trying to make the Foreign Office understand how Riga had overnight, I think he says, gone from a prosperous little town to an absolute hellscape of kind of an economy that didn't work, of starvation, of dirty, miserable people. And just overnight, because forced Sovietization,
catastrophic,
as New Yorkers are potentially about to find out.
Might have to edit that bit out.
I'm not editing that bit out. Forced Sovietization, it is an unbelievably unpleasant thing to experience. And
so the economy basically collapses.
The economy collapses,
and that's part of the deal, is that you almost want the authorities want the economy to collapse, so they can then rebuild it in the way that they want. But it means the complete collapse in the meantime, which for anyone who has anything in terms of possessions, savings, property, forget it. It's gone.
Or a desire to eat bread,
for example.
Now, I think we've made the case that it's a day that changed the world. We're going to talk about a couple of books that we think that people should read if they want to be further convinced, or if they just want to read more books about it. Now, obviously, the first one is your book, Roger.
Yes, I mean, shameless bit of self-promotion. This is why I picked it up as a subject. I mean, I have, as you know, I have a sort of an East European hat and an East European fascination. So, in a sense, I saw the pact even before the book. I saw it very much from that perspective, and it always bothered me that it wasn't written about in a more sensible way in the English-speaking world. So it was that kind of frustration that made me write the book, actually. So
it's the book you wanted to read. You just had to go out
exactly.
and write it.
No one else had written it, so I said, "Well, I'll do it." So I did, and honestly, I mean, that came out now 11 years ago. I think it was 2014. I do honestly think it stands up pretty well. I think it hasn't been disproved, or I would say almost superseded. But there's another example here of a chap who followed on, and I think I would like to think that he's followed on a little bit in my footsteps, which is Ian Johnson's Faustian Bargain. He does a great job again of telling the story of the pact and the relationship, and he does situate the pact within a slightly wider narrative of German-Soviet relations, which is something that I did to some extent, but he runs with that. So he talks about the relationship during the Treaty of Rapallo from 1922, for example. That gives a bit of the sort of longer context to it. So I think he does a very good job with that. It's a very good book. But there's still actually only very, very few books actually on the pact itself. So there's not that much to choose from, I'm afraid. But those two I can heartily recommend.
Brilliant. And the one I want to recommend is a memoir, because I thought what it does is tell you a little bit. It personalizes the experience of what it meant to be Sovietized.
Yes.
So it is called Shadows on the Tundra by Dalia Grinkevičiūtė.
Lovely.
Something like that. Yeah. Anyway, she was 14 in June 1941. It was a week before Operation Barbarossa, and she gets caught up in the deportations. Her and her family are picked up from their comfortable lives in Lithuania, and it takes them a year to get there, trundling through the wilds of Russia and Siberia on those really slow trains. But eventually they are dumped on an island in the Arctic Circle. and they're told they're going to be timber farmers, this bunch of slightly clueless Lithuanian middle-class families. And before they can start kind of farming the timber, or whatever you call it, like
Logging.
they have to build their own timber camp in the Arctic with nothing.
Yeah.
She eventually makes it back to Lithuania. She writes all her memories on like little bits of paper and buries them in a glass jar in the garden so that the KGB don't find them. And they weren't actually found until 1991.
Oh.
Is like Dahlia is like the Anne Frank of the deportations, and the book is unbelievably good. And I'm going to prove that by reading a little bit. This is a passage where she's trying to get back to her barracks. She's been out on the tundra. She says, "Here we are, our palace of a barracks. I've reached the first corner of the red brick building, but my energy is gone. I feel dizzy, ravenously hungry. I suck, I bite my lips, stuff my mouth with snow, chew, but my hunger does not go away. Yet what splendor above. The northern lights are a magnificent web of colour. We are surrounded by grandeur, the immense tundra, as ruthless and infinite as the sea, the vast Lena estuary backed up with the ice. The colossal 100-metre pillar caves on the shores of Stolby and the Aurora Borealis. Against a background of such majesty, we are the pitiful things here, starved and infested like dogs and nearly done in, rotting in our befouled and stinking ice caves." Anyway.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. She's a brilliant writer. Her experiences are heartrending. And also, like the best examples of memoirs written in desperate circumstances in the Gulag or whatever, there's also just such a triumphantly defiant spirit and insistence on being human, even though Stalin is trying to make you inhuman.
Yes. And we should add that, I mean, there are other examples
Oh, yeah,
as
some really
we've
good ones.
discussed. There's some very good ones. But this is still a subject that the Western canon of history, even the Western canon of history on World War II, seems to resolutely ignore. And it's sort of baffling because, as you know, once you get into that stuff, there's some fantastic material. It's an astonishing story in all of its manifestations. And the material is there. And you think, why is no one writing about this? It is brilliant. So absolutely, and that's a great example.
Yeah,
thank you for that.
she's a heroine. And thank you, Roger. I think we started out agreed. We'd ended up agreeing. It's the day that changed the world. So we'd love our listeners to tell us what they think and suggest to us some more days
Absolutely.
that change the world so that we can have a look at.
Lovely.
I'll see you next time.
Thank you.